In the late 1800s, Japanese contract workers were sent to Hawaii to work on sugar plantations. This later turned into them working and moving on railroads and sawmills in the western United States. Because such a large number of Japanese Americans moved so suddenly, it caused racial discrimination. As a result, multiple Japanese internment camps were formed across the western coast. These camps later turned into the towns referred to as Little Tokyos. The evacuation of Japanese Americans started as a voluntary evacuation, but when the majority of Japanese descendants refused to leave their homes, the voluntary evacuation ended. The government began the mandatory mass removal and incarceration of Japanese Americans in multiple concentration camps across the United States of America. After President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, many Japanese internment camps were installed alongside the West Coast, apart from multiple places in the southeastern parts of the United States. This is because states such as California, Washington, and Oregon were heavily populated Japanese American communities. Japanese Americans were forced to relocate from their homes with very little time to pack away their entire lives. This photo was taken on April 12, 1942 in Los Angeles, California. This is only 2 months after Executive Order 9066. Japanese Americans were forced to bunch inside box train cars and be taken to their designated internment camp. The people seen here packing on the outside of the train would soon be taken to the Manzanar camp. In 1942, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066. That means that Japanese Americans were located and detained from the authorities. They were also required to pack their belongings and be evacuated from their homes. Their sentences were at least up to 3 or more years. The evidence suggests that families are suffering from consequences based off their racial and religious prejudices. This is what typical relocation looked like among many Japanese American families in the concentration camps. Taking only what they could carry, being locked in a caged facility, and having to explain to their loved ones and families that this was only temporary. But many knew that the harsh conditions were only just getting started for many of them. Fred Korematsu refused to leave his home after Roosevelt ordered all Japanese Americans to be relocated to the concentration camps. He went to the court and claimed that this order violated his right as an American citizen. The court ruled the order constitutional, resulting in Korematsu losing the case. His actions were found by the court to be a violation of the president's order. The Supreme Court case versus Korematsu versus U.S. was an important case because it was the only case that upheld a restriction on civil liberties, due to the case being upheld via the systematic racism at the time. He refused to leave for a relocation camp and was then later arrested. Tamakashi was a Japanese American that was incarcerated in the American concentration camps. He and his family were sent to 2 different camps and were ultimately expatriated and sent to Japan, due to them failing their loyalty questionnaire. He and multiple other family members would then return to the United States after the war ended. Akashi would then publish a book called Betrayed Trust in 2004, detailing the events he and his family went through. The first Japanese Americans that arrived in Manzanar in March 1942. This 500-acre housing was surrounded by barbed wire, 8 guarded towers by searchlights, and patrolled military police. By September 1942, more than 10,000 people were crowded into 544 barracks, organized into 36 blocks. Children who were held in these camps often look happy in pictures. Their perception of the events going on at the time was limited. Some adults made sure to protect them from the truth with small details such as this. Gestures like this improved a child's experience, but did not remove the horrid conditions that they had to endure through their time in the concentration camps. The education was an essential component of life in the internment camps. The War Relocation Authority provided education through the high school for all school-age residents. When temperatures rose and the school was filled, the classroom was sweltering and unbearable at times. Without adequate funding, the school supplies and the equipment was always in short supply. Kazuka Uno Bill was born in Seattle, Washington in 1921 as a Japanese American. Both of her parents were Japanese immigrants. Kazuka was a senior at the University of Washington and working on her family's farm the day of the Pearl Harbor attack. Her father was taken the next day, and the rest of her family received a letter telling them that they needed to relocate to camps. Over the next few years, Kazuka learned to use her medical education to get herself a job as a laboratory worker in the camp. The smiles captured in this photo show how the Americans completely brainwashed the imprisoned Japanese Americans by leaving out the basic information on camp life, the rules, and the fact they are being dehumanized, due to them being racially profiled as the enemy, due to the U.S. fighting Japan in the Second World War. Pictured here is the Japanese press. The significance of having Japanese press shows outsiders a scoop of the daily life of the Japanese and Japanese Americans that were imprisoned in the internment camps. The Japanese press was also written in English and in Japanese. The Japanese press was reporting activities of the imperial soldiers as they were approaching the capital city, of which later became known as the 100-Man killing contest. Two of the Japanese soldiers, Takashi Mukai and Tsuyoshi Noda, were involved in the contest. The first 100 Chinese men in the brawl were killed for military weaponry. The historians today continue to debate the contest based off evidence that has been collected since. Despite facing racially biased internment, many second-generation Japanese Americans decided to prove themselves against the same country that falsely imprisoned them. Over 33,000 Nisei declared to join the U.S. Army during the Second World War. President Obama can be seen here saluting Tommy Okabayashi after receiving the Gold Congressional Medal, which is one of the highest civilian awards in the country. Tommy and thousands of other Japanese American veterans would soon receive this medal, finally recognizing their service for their country. Maso Kui is someone who lived through more than 3 years in the camps and used this experience to educate younger generation on the experiences of those who were trapped in these camps. Okui and his granddaughters often host tours in the camps where he once lived. These educational tours promote an accurate dictation of the events that once took place in Camp Mazinar. The usage of literature to educate about past events gives us an inside perspective. Books like The Bracelet by Yoshiko Uchida provide students with a sense of what the experiences of the camps would have been like for someone their age. Modoc County was once home to over 30,000 relocated Japanese Americans. There was a lot of discussion in 2018 about whether there should be an 8-foot fence built around the airport. The debate was based off the airport being important in remembering the history of Japanese Americans. It would stop any survivors from coming and seeing the place that once held their family members.